It was a bright morning in a small American town, the kind of day when people came together to honor their heroes. The town square was decorated with flags and flowers, and the sound of a marching band filled the air. Everyone seemed excited, talking and laughing as they waited for the Memorial Day ceremony to begin. Among the crowd walked an elderly black man, slowly making his way toward the front. His back was straight, but he moved with the careful steps of someone who had carried heavy burdens in his life. He wore a clean shirt, a faded jacket, and a simple hat with a small pin on it. In his hand, he carried an old cap that had once been part of his military uniform. He looked around, smiling politely at people as he passed. Most of them didn't recognize him. To them, he was just another older man there to watch the ceremony. As he reached the area near the front, where rows of chairs were neatly arranged for guests and veterans, two young event helpers stopped him. One of them held up a hand and said, "Sir, this area is for special guests and veterans only. You'll have to step aside." The old man paused and looked at them kindly. "I understand," he said softly. "I thought maybe I could sit with the other veterans." The second helper shook his head, looking a little impatient. "Sorry, sir, but we already have the seats filled. You can stand by the fence. The view's still good from there." There was no anger in the old man's eyes, just a quiet acceptance. He nodded and stepped aside. He didn't argue or explain. He simply moved to the back, where he found a small space near the fence. He leaned slightly on his cane, looking toward the stage as if nothing had happened. A few people nearby noticed the scene. A woman whispered to her husband, "That's not right. He looks like a veteran himself." But no one said anything out loud. The helpers, busy greeting other guests, didn't look back at the man they had turned away. The ceremony was about to start, and the crowd grew quiet. Children held small flags, and families stood together, waiting for the first speaker to take the stage. The man stood silently, his hands resting on his cane. He didn't seem upset. If anything, his eyes carried a calm, distant look, as if he was remembering something far away. Behind him, a younger man in uniform noticed him and frowned. He recognized the face but couldn't believe what he had just seen. He had read about this man before, about the soldier who had once carried 3 wounded comrades to safety during a fierce battle overseas. The story was famous among veterans in the region, but it had happened many years ago, and not everyone knew who the man was anymore. The younger man quietly asked another veteran beside him, "Isn't that Mr. Thompson?" The other veteran squinted and nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's him. Haven't seen him in years." The realization hit the young officer hard. He glanced toward the 2 event helpers still standing proudly near the front, unaware of what they had done. He wanted to walk over and tell them right away, but the ceremony had already begun. The mayor stepped up to the microphone to give the opening speech, thanking everyone for coming. The officer stayed still, his mind racing. He knew the truth would come out soon enough, and when it did, people would realize how they had treated one of their greatest heroes. Meanwhile, the old man kept his focus on the stage. As the band played the national anthem, he straightened his posture and placed his hand over his heart. His lips moved quietly with the words. Some people nearby began to notice him more closely now, the way he stood, the quiet pride in his face, the tears that glistened in his eyes as the flag waved gently in the breeze. A young boy standing beside his father whispered, "Dad, is he a soldier?" The father nodded. "Yes, son, I think he is, and a great one." The ceremony continued, but now whispers began spreading through the crowd. People pointed discreetly toward the man near the fence. Someone pulled out their phone and quickly searched his name, confirming what the officer already knew. Within minutes, the quiet talk turned into surprise. The 2 event helpers began to feel uncomfortable as they noticed more and more eyes looking in their direction. The man they had told to step aside had become the center of attention, without saying a single word, but he didn't notice. He was still watching the stage, smiling faintly at the children singing a patriotic song. When the music ended, he clapped softly, just like everyone else. The younger officer could no longer keep quiet. He walked up to the host and leaned in to whisper something. The host looked confused at first, then his eyes widened in shock. He quickly thanked the officer and turned back to the microphone. "Before we continue," the host said, his voice slightly trembling, "I've just learned something important. There's someone among us today who deserves special recognition." The crowd went silent. The old man near the fence looked up curiously, not realizing the host was talking about him. The host continued, "Many of you might not know this, but standing right there is one of our town's greatest heroes, a veteran who served bravely and risked his life to save others during the war. He's a man of courage and humility, and we are honored to have him here today." Every head turned toward the back. The old man blinked in surprise as people began to move aside, making space for him. The helpers who had told him to leave looked frozen, their faces pale. The officer stepped forward, extending his hand. "Sir," he said with deep respect, "please come forward. You belong up front where you should have been from the start." The old man hesitated for a moment, clearly moved. The crowd began clapping softly at first, then louder. The sound grew until it filled the entire square. Some people stood, others saluted. The man slowly walked forward, his cane tapping lightly on the pavement. When he reached the front row, one of the embarrassed helpers quickly pulled out a chair for him. He sat down quietly, his eyes glistening. The applause didn't stop. It became louder and louder, echoing through the air like a wave of gratitude. People weren't cheering for his medals or his past. They were cheering for his quiet dignity, for his patience, and for the reminder of what real honor looked like. The young helpers looked at him with tears in their eyes, realizing they had just learned one of the most powerful lessons of their lives. The ceremony continued with a warm and respectful silence. The old veteran, now seated in the front row, still looked humble and calm. He didn't seem to notice how everyone's eyes stayed on him, or how people whispered softly about his bravery. For him, it wasn't about attention. He had come simply to honor others who never made it back home. But the crowd couldn't stop looking at him. They had all realized that the quiet man they almost ignored had once done something extraordinary. As the next speaker stepped up, the host leaned over to thank the veteran for attending. The man just smiled politely and nodded. "I'm glad to be here," he said. "It's good to see so many young faces remembering the ones we lost." The two helpers who had turned him away earlier stood near the side of the stage, still looking embarrassed. One of them whispered, "I can't believe we told him to move." The other replied softly, "We didn't know, but we should have treated him better anyway." They both fell quiet again, feeling the weight of their mistake. The next part of the event began, a short presentation about local heroes. The screen behind the stage showed pictures of soldiers from the town, both past and present. When one picture appeared, a few people gasped quietly. It showed a much younger version of the same man sitting in the front row, wearing his uniform, standing proudly beside his team. The host read his name aloud and told the story of how he had saved several lives during an intense battle overseas, even after being wounded himself. He was one of the few who made it home. The audience clapped, and the veteran bowed his head slightly, his eyes misty. It was clear that the memories were still alive inside him. He didn't want praise. He just wanted to remember those who didn't come back. But for everyone else, it was a powerful reminder that heroes don't always look the way we expect. After the presentation, a local student choir came up to sing. Their voices filled the air with emotion, and the veteran smiled softly, tapping his cane to the rhythm. A little girl sitting nearby turned around and gave him a small flag she was waving. "This is for you," she said shyly. The man's face lit up. He thanked her and carefully placed the flag in his jacket pocket, patting it gently. The crowd began to feel something shift inside them. The story had changed the atmosphere. People who had come for a regular ceremony were now standing taller, listening more closely and feeling a deeper respect for the meaning of the day. The young helpers, still near the side, finally gathered the courage to walk over to the veteran during a short break. One of them spoke softly. "Sir, we owe you an apology. We didn't mean any disrespect. We just didn't know." The old man looked up, his expression kind. "It's all right," he said. "You were just doing your job. Sometimes we don't see people for who they really are until someone points it out." The young man nodded, clearly moved. Still, it wasn't right. "I'll remember this." The veteran gave him a gentle pat on the arm. "That's all that matters," he said. "Remembering." When the break ended, the host invited the veteran to say a few words if he wished. He seemed surprised, but slowly rose from his chair with the help of his cane. The crowd grew silent again as he walked toward the microphone. The sound of his footsteps on the wooden stage was the only thing anyone could hear. He adjusted the microphone slightly and looked out at the faces before him. His voice was soft but steady. "I didn't plan to speak today," he began. "I came here to remember my friends. Some of them were younger than the students sitting in this front row. They gave their lives so that we could stand here in peace today. I don't want anyone to remember me for what I did. I just want people to remember them." The audience listened carefully. You could feel the emotion in every word. "You see," he continued, "we all wear different uniforms in life. Some people serve in the military, some serve their families, and some serve their communities. It doesn't matter what we wear. What matters is that we show kindness and respect to everyone." He paused, looking toward the young helpers who had stepped back to the side. "Because you never know who someone really is. Sometimes the quietest people have carried the heaviest stories." For a moment, the entire place was silent. Then the applause began, slow and steady at first, then stronger and stronger until the whole square echoed with it. The veteran smiled shyly, gave a small wave, and returned to his seat. The rest of the ceremony carried on, but something about it felt different now. The air seemed warmer, the people more connected. The mayor, who was scheduled to close the event, decided to change his speech on the spot. He spoke about humility, respect, and how easy it is to overlook someone's worth. He pointed toward the veteran and said, "This man taught us more today without trying than many of us could in a lifetime." As the crowd began to disperse after the ceremony, people lined up to shake the veteran's hand. Some thanked him for his service. Others simply said, "It's an honor to meet you." A few veterans saluted him quietly, their eyes filled with pride and emotion. Children ran up to him too, curious and full of admiration. One little boy asked, "Were you scared in the war?" The man chuckled softly and replied, "Of course I was. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you keep going even when you are." The boy nodded seriously, as if the words would stay with him forever. As the crowd thinned, the sun began to lower in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the park. The veteran stood for a while, looking at the flag waving gently above the stage. The younger officer who had recognized him came over. "Sir, that was powerful," he said. "You reminded everyone what this day truly means." The veteran gave a small smile. "I didn't remind them," he said quietly. "They just remembered." The officer nodded respectfully, understanding exactly what he meant. The two young helpers approached again before leaving. They offered to help him back to his car. He accepted with a thankful nod, and together they walked slowly across the park. People passing by still smiled and waved at him. The helpers didn't say much, but the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was thoughtful. When they reached his car, he turned to them and said, "You did good today. You made a mistake, yes, but you also learned something. That's what matters." They both smiled, feeling lighter. "Thank you, sir," one of them said. "We'll never forget it." As the car drove away, the crowd in the distance still lingered, talking about the man who had changed the tone of an entire ceremony just by being himself. The story was already spreading from person to person, and by the end of the day, it would be shared far beyond the town square. For everyone who had been there, it wasn't just a Memorial Day event anymore. It was a reminder that respect, humility, and kindness never go out of style. And for the veteran, it was enough to know that maybe for one day, people had seen the deeper meaning behind the uniform and the medals, the human heart that carried them. The next morning, the story of what had happened at the Memorial Day ceremony spread across town like wildfire. People who hadn't attended were now hearing about the humble veteran who had been told to step aside, only for the crowd to later cheer for him. Local newspapers picked up the story, and by noon, photos from the event were already circulating online. Comments flooded in, calling the moment a powerful lesson in respect. But for the veteran himself, life went on quietly. He lived in a small house at the edge of town, surrounded by old trees and the soft sound of birds. He didn't have a television, and he rarely used his phone. That morning, he sat on his porch, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, completely unaware that the whole town was talking about him. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves as he looked out over his small garden. He had planted it himself years ago, filled with flowers that reminded him of his late wife. He smiled softly, remembering how she used to tease him for talking to the plants as if they were people. To him, they were more than just flowers. They were memories that bloomed every year. A car pulled up in front of his house, breaking his quiet morning. It was the same young officer from the ceremony, stepping out with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir," he said as he approached. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," the veteran replied. "You're always welcome here." He gestured toward a chair on the porch. "Sit down, son. You look like you came with something on your mind." The officer nodded, taking a seat. "Yes, sir. I just wanted to thank you again for what you said yesterday. It moved everyone, including me. The mayor's office has been getting calls all morning. People want to do something special to honor you." The veteran chuckled softly. "Honor me? For what?" "I just spoke from the heart." "I know," the officer said, "but sometimes the simplest words reach the farthest." He reminded people what real respect means. The veteran leaned back, his gaze distant. "Respect isn't given by crowds or medals. It's how you treat people when no one's watching." He took another sip of coffee and added, "That's what my captain used to tell us." "I never forgot it," the officer smiled. "That's a lesson everyone needed to hear." For a moment, they both sat quietly, listening to the wind move through the trees. The veteran's dog, a small brown mutt with tired eyes, wandered over and rested its head on his knee. He patted it gently. The officer hesitated before speaking again. "Sir, the school is planning a special event next week to honor local veterans. They'd be honored if you could come and share a few words with the students. They were really touched by your story." The veteran looked thoughtful. "I don't know if I'm much of a speaker," he said, "but if it helps teach them something good, I'll be there." A few days later, the school gymnasium filled with students, teachers, and parents. The veteran arrived quietly, wearing the same jacket from the ceremony. When he stepped inside, the students clapped, and a few teachers guided him to a chair near the front. He was surprised to see his picture displayed on the screen, along with the words, "A true hero among us." The principal welcomed everyone and spoke briefly about the meaning of service and sacrifice. Then he invited the veteran to come forward. The room went still as the old man stood up, his cane tapping lightly on the floor with each step. He looked around at the young faces watching him, some curious, some inspired, some not yet old enough to understand fully what he had done. He smiled and began, "When I was about your age, I didn't think much about bravery or sacrifice. I just wanted to do something that mattered. I never imagined I'd go to war. But when the time came, I went because I believed in helping others." The students listened intently. He told them simple stories, not of battles or medals, but of friendship, teamwork, and loss. He talked about how the strongest soldiers weren't always the loudest ones, and how courage sometimes looked like helping someone else before helping yourself. His words were calm and honest, spoken with the kind of wisdom that only comes from experience. At one point, a student raised his hand and asked, "Were you ever afraid?" The veteran smiled gently. "Every single day," he said. "Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared." The boy nodded slowly, thinking about it. The veteran continued, "And remember, bravery doesn't just belong to soldiers. You can be brave in your own way. Stand up for someone being treated unfairly. Speak the truth when it's easier to stay quiet. That's courage too." The gym stayed silent for a few moments after he finished speaking. Then the applause began again, strong and heartfelt. A few students even stood up, clapping with all their energy. The veteran looked overwhelmed but grateful. He gave a small wave and returned to his seat. After the event, many students came up to thank him. One young girl handed him a card she had drawn, showing a soldier standing under a flag with the words, "Thank you for your bravery." The veteran smiled warmly and said, "That's the best medal I could ever get." The principal approached him afterward. "You've made quite an impression," he said. "I think the whole town has learned something from you." The veteran shook his head modestly. "I just reminded them of what they already knew. Sometimes people just need a little nudge to remember." Outside, as he walked to his car, he saw a group of students waving goodbye. He waved back, feeling a quiet sense of peace. The sky was turning golden with the afternoon sun, and the air smelled of cut grass and springtime. When he got home that evening, he sat on his porch again, watching the sun set behind the hills. The sound of distant laughter carried on the breeze from the park, and he smiled to himself. He never wanted fame or attention, only to live with kindness and humility. But now his simple act of patience at a small-town ceremony had touched more lives than he ever expected. Later that night, the young officer called him again. "Sir," he said, "the video of your speech at the school is going viral online. People from all over the country are sharing it. The veteran laughed softly. Viral? Well, that's something new for an old man like me. Yes, sir, the officer replied. They're calling you a symbol of quiet strength. You've reminded everyone that respect and humility still matter. The veteran grew quiet for a moment. Then he said, if that message reaches just one person who needs to hear it, that's enough for me. As he hung up, he looked out at the stars beginning to fill the night sky. The world was changing faster than he could keep up with, but some things, he thought, should never change, like kindness, respect, and the courage to do what's right. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the crickets and the soft rustle of the wind. For the first time in a long while, he felt a deep peace settle over him. Somewhere out there, people were learning something from his story, and that was all the reward he ever needed. A week later, the veteran's quiet life took another unexpected turn. One afternoon, a knock came at his door. When he opened it, he found two people standing there, a man and a woman holding a camera. They introduced themselves as reporters from a national news network. They said they had come to do a short interview about the story that had touched so many hearts. The veteran looked surprised. Interview? I'm not sure there's much to say, he said kindly. I'm just an old man who went to a ceremony, the reporter smiled. With respect, sir, you reminded people of something very important. The way you handled that moment, it moved millions. He hesitated, then nodded. All right. But only if we talk about the people who didn't come home. That's who the real story is about. They agreed, and soon the interview began right there on his porch. The afternoon light made everything look soft and peaceful. The veteran sat in his chair, his cane resting against his knee, speaking with honesty and warmth. He told them about the friends he had lost, the lessons he had learned, and the importance of treating others with dignity, no matter who they were. I didn't want anyone to feel bad, he said, referring to the helpers from the ceremony. I just wanted them to understand. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them. The interviewer nodded. And what lesson do you hope people take away from your story? He thought for a moment, then replied softly, that kindness is never wasted. You never know whose heart you might touch with a simple act of respect. When the interview aired a few days later, it went far beyond the small town. People across the country shared it on social media. Veterans groups, schools, and even community leaders praised his humility and wisdom. The story inspired discussions about respect, race, and the quiet strength of those who had served but never sought recognition. Letters started arriving at his home, handwritten notes from strangers. Some were from veterans who thanked him for reminding the world of what true service meant. Others came from young people who said his story made them want to be kinder and more understanding. He read each one slowly, often smiling or wiping away a tear. One letter stood out. It was from a young woman who wrote, My grandfather was also a veteran. He passed away last year, and I regret never asking him about his life. Your story made me realize how many heroes we walk past every day without knowing their stories. Thank you for reminding me to listen. The veteran folded that letter carefully and kept it in his jacket pocket. It meant more to him than all the attention. Meanwhile, the town decided to do something special. The mayor called him one morning to say they wanted to dedicate a bench in the park in his honor. It's not just for you, the mayor said, but for every veteran who's ever felt unseen. We wanted to remind people to look a little closer at the faces around them. At first, the veteran resisted. I don't need a bench with my name on it, he said. But the mayor explained, it's not about your name, it's about your message. So he finally agreed. The day of the dedication arrived, and the whole town gathered again. This time the weather was even brighter and the mood was full of warmth and gratitude. Children held small flags and local musicians played soft tunes. The veteran sat quietly in the front row, surrounded by people who now looked at him with admiration and respect. When it was time to speak, the mayor stepped up and said, Sometimes it takes a simple act to open our eyes. Last week, one man's patience and grace reminded us what real honor looks like. This bench will stand as a symbol of that lesson. He pulled back the cloth covering the bench, revealing a small plaque that read, In honor of those who served with quiet courage, inspired by one who reminded us all. The crowd applauded warmly. The veteran looked down at the plaque, his eyes glistening. He didn't see it as his own tribute, but as a sign that people were starting to see the deeper meaning of the story. After the ceremony, people came up to shake his hand, take pictures, and share stories about their own loved ones who had served. He listened to every word, nodding with genuine interest. He didn't like being called a hero, but he loved hearing about others' courage. Later that evening, he stayed at the park long after everyone had left. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and orange. He sat on the bench reading the words on the plaque again. A gentle breeze rustled the trees and he smiled to himself. For the first time, he felt that maybe his quiet message had reached further than he ever imagined. As he sat there, a young boy approached shyly. It was the same boy who had spoken to him at the first ceremony. He carried a small sketchbook in his hands. "Sir," the boy said, "I drew something for you." He opened the book to show a simple drawing of the veteran sitting under a flag, surrounded by people clapping. At the bottom it said, "Respect everyone." The old man's heart melted. "That's beautiful, son," he said softly. "You've captured the whole story in 3 words." The boy grinned proudly. "I'm going to show it to my class tomorrow." "You do that," the veteran said with a smile, "and tell them to remember that respect starts with small things." When the boy left, the veteran sat quietly for a while, watching the lights of the town begin to flicker on. He could hear laughter from a nearby playground and the hum of life moving forward. It comforted him to know that in his own small way, he had left something behind, not fame or wealth, but a reminder of what truly matters. As night fell, the young officer from before stopped by the park. He found the veteran sitting on the bench, lost in thought. "Evening, sir," he said softly. "Evening," the veteran replied, smiling. "Come sit down." The officer sat beside him. For a while they said nothing, just listened to the sounds of the night. Finally, the officer spoke. "You know, sir, people keep asking me what kind of man you are. I tell them you're the kind of man who teaches without trying." The veteran chuckled. "I'm just a man who believes in treating people right." "That's all," the officer nodded. "That's more than enough." They sat together a little longer, watching the stars come out one by one. The town was quiet, peaceful. The bench gleamed faintly under the lamplight, its plaque shining like a small promise to the future. Before leaving, the officer said, "Sir, that bench will be here long after we're gone. People will see it and remember you." The veteran smiled. "If they remember kindness instead of me, that's all I could ask for." He watched as the officer walked away, then leaned back and closed his eyes, listening to the crickets sing. Somewhere deep inside, he felt something settle, a gentle peace that came from knowing he had done his part in the world. The crowd was still standing, clapping as if they never wanted to stop. The sound of hands coming together echoed through the park, and it felt like the air itself was filled with pride. The old veteran, sitting in the front row now, didn't say a word. He simply looked around with quiet eyes that had seen too much in his lifetime. His hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from emotion he hadn't felt in years. The host, standing on the stage, tried to continue speaking, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and said, "Sometimes heroes walk among us without expecting recognition. Today, we honor one of them." The crowd began to cheer again, louder this time, and a few people even whistled in excitement. The young organizers who had told the veteran to move aside earlier stood near the back, tears forming in their eyes. They clapped too, and their faces were red with guilt and respect. The veteran turned slightly and gave a small nod in their direction. It wasn't a long stare, but it was enough to let them know he held no anger. That gesture hit them harder than any lecture ever could. It was forgiveness. Simple, quiet, and real. A few minutes later, the ceremony continued, but something had changed in the air. Every word the host spoke, every name called, carried new meaning. When it was time for the moment of silence, the entire park stood completely still. Even the wind seemed to pause. In that silence, the crowd felt the weight of what the veteran had endured, what he had sacrificed, and how much he had given, without ever asking for anything in return. After the ceremony ended, people began walking toward the veteran one by one. Some wanted to shake his hand. Others simply wanted to say thank you. A little boy approached him holding a small flag and said softly, "My grandpa was a soldier too." The veteran smiled, placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Then you come from strong roots." The boy's mother, standing behind him, wiped a tear from her eye. The officer who had recognized the veteran earlier came over and saluted him properly this time. "Sir," he said respectfully, "I just want to say it's an honor to meet you." The veteran smiled again, stood up slowly with the help of his cane, and returned the salute. "No, son," he said kindly. "The honor is mine, to see young folks like you carrying it forward." That small exchange made everyone nearby emotional. The crowd that had gathered around stayed quiet, listening to every word. The young organizers finally walked up too. One of them spoke first, nervously. "Sir, we're so sorry for how we treated you earlier. We didn't know who you were." The veteran looked at them with calm eyes. "You didn't have to know who I was," he said gently. "All you had to do was show a little kindness. That's all any of us need." His words were soft but powerful, and they sank deep into their hearts. The older man beside him, another veteran from the same town, leaned over and whispered, "You handled that better than any of us would have." The veteran chuckled lightly. "Life's too short for anger," he said. "I've seen what hate does. It takes more from you than it ever gives." As people began to leave, a local reporter approached and asked if he'd be willing to share his story. The veteran shook his head. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about every soldier who never made it home. They're the ones who deserve the spotlight." His humility made the reporter put the microphone down. There was nothing more to ask. The man's character spoke louder than any words could. When the park started to empty, a few of the younger veterans stayed behind with him. They helped him to his car, even though he insisted he could walk on his own. Before he got in, he turned back to look at the flag flying high above the park. The sun was beginning to set, and its light hit the flag just right, making it glow softly. He stood there for a moment, lost in thought. One of the young men asked quietly, "Sir, what were you thinking about?" The old veteran smiled. "Just remembering," he said, "and hoping that this generation keeps the spirit alive." He got into his car, rolled down the window and waved one last time before driving off slowly. The crowd that remained watched him go, still feeling the weight of what had just happened. They knew they'd witnessed something rare, something that would stay with them for years. Later that evening, people couldn't stop talking about it. Social media filled with photos of the veteran and stories about what had happened at the ceremony. No one knew his full name or where exactly he lived, but everyone in town agreed that he had reminded them what true honor looked like. The young organizers made a post apologizing for how they treated him and thanked the community for showing them what respect really means. At home that night, the veteran sat quietly by his window sipping tea. His medals hung on the wall beside him, untouched for years. He didn't look at them often. For him, the real reward was the feeling he carried inside, that for one brief moment, people had come together not because of titles or status, but because they recognized the heart of a man who had given everything for his country. Outside, the night was calm. The old veteran smiled faintly, thinking about the boy with the flag, the officer who saluted him, and the people who had stood to cheer. He whispered to himself, "It was all worth it." Then he leaned back in his chair, content, as the soft sound of crickets filled the air. And though the day had ended, the lesson he left behind stayed with everyone who had been there. That respect should never be based on appearances, but on the kindness we show, even when we don't know who's watching.